Pathfinder GMs, stop me if you've heard this one. Your players are going up against one of your named bad guys with a couple of their goons. The goons are obviously a level or two lower than the PCs, which is fine. However, the fight begins, and after a round or two, your minions start to follow a familiar pattern. Strike, maybe hit. Strike, miss, end turn. This is fine, right? It's fine. Absolutely fine. We're not dying a little inside as they do little more than act as terrain to navigate around. Hey everyone, the voice you're hearing is mine. I am Obscura, and the lovely visage you see before you is my Eldritch buddy Wheaton. We're kind of in a shared body situation, but you don't have to worry about that because today I want to help you out with something I've struggled with in PF2 that I hope I can help other GMs with. That is making your big bad boss's underlings a little bit better, or at least a little bit more helpful. We're going to start with some thoughts I've had on their place in combat, then we're going to move on to some tactics you could use with general actions, before moving on to some more advanced tactics that require a little more work but are a little more fun. Let's start with a basic definition for underlings. By underlings, I mean the goons, the fodder, the creatures the boss brings with them. The unnamed members of their entourage that you scramble to think of names for when the PCs ask and get weirdly insistent. Now, looking at the meteor, and a familiar theme keeps coming up. They're easily dispatched by the heroes while the actual boss is doing something else. They're not necessarily whatever their normal role would be, they're support. We see this reflected in how PF2 builds encounters, with encounters often containing one foe that's a big threat, and is usually the same level of the PCs or higher, and then a couple of other creatures backing them up that are a lower level than the PCs. This will mean that unless your minions roll really well, they're only going to be hitting on their first strike, wasting the other two actions, and the more of them there is, the less likely they are to hit at all. Once again, this isn't a problem for the most part, it's how the system functions, but this does mean that our dear underlings aren't really there to do the majority of the damage. They're there to support, to fluff the pillows and sharpen the swords of the real threat. Okay, so now we've settled that. How do we as GMs for Pathfinder 2 get the most out of our minions? This is by no means meant to be exhausted, but will hopefully get the juices moving on things you can do with them. My example from the start is pretty common when it comes down to it. It's something we're kind of used to, and it does get the turnover pretty quickly, so it's understandable. However, there's other options using basic actions, and I do want to present a couple of them. The first one is for when a close combat minion needs to close the distance, but not that far, just in one stride. Instead of doing a stride then two strikes, an alternative would be stride once, demoralize, then strike. Demoralize is something a lot of players know about and use often, but GMs, remember, it's in your arsenal as well. The best part of demoralize is if it's successful, it's a debuff that gets applied to the player character, meaning this helps the boss as well. Back to that support role, yeah? With the demoralize coming before the strike, it also means that it's easier for the minion in question to hit. Also remember, demoralize immunity is based on the creature that uses the demoralize, not the target of it, so you can mix up the minions using it in an attempt to keep the debuff up. And if demoralize doesn't work, they weren't going to be hitting with that second attack anyway. The next tactic you can use is for when you have a close combat minion already in combat. This is particularly good against heavy armored PCs or when they have their shield raised. Start by using demoralize, but then for their second action have them attempt to trip, then step. Demoralize doesn't have the attack trait, so it doesn't apply map. However, Frightened gives a debuff to saves which makes the trip easier. Now the trip itself targets reflex DC. This is why it's good against heavy armor, because those PCs in heavy armor likely don't have the greatest reflex DC. The step means that the PC has to spend an additional action to close the distance. In combat, this means that if you trip them, the PC has to spend one action to stand, then another to close the distance, leaving them with one action to attack. The similar method here is to replace the second action with a grapple, then the third with take cover. This is good if your minion is likely going to be copying it from casters, because the grapple will make the PC off guard, making them easier for the rest of your bad guys, but then take cover will give your grappling goon a tasty +2 bonus to both AC and reflex saves, increasing their survivability against ranged attacks. Speaking of range though, what about our ranged minions? Take cover comes in handy here once again. Make sure your ranged minions have access to cover, but otherwise have them strike, taking their shot, then take cover and either hide or sneak. Take cover will give them a bonus to their AC and stealth, and hide or sneak means that if their stealth check beats the perception DC of the PCs, it means they'll be off guard to their next strike, making it easier for them to hit once again. As an honorable mention, never forget the benefits of aid. Most minions don't have a use for their reactions, so having them spend an action during their turn to assist one of their fellow comrades or their boss to hit or do other actions is a perfect usage for it. Moving on from basic actions, I'm going to talk about a couple of other options that push beyond them, making your own actions and giving a little bit of guidance on what can work really well for minions. I do eventually want to make a video covering boss actions and how you can give your big bad some really cool abilities, but that's for later. We've got to start with a solid foundation after all. To start with, and this is something I do often, is simply adding skills to minions. As simple as it sounds, some people can be hesitant to do it. Don't be. The system is robust enough to handle it if you add a couple of skills to an NPC, so long as it makes sense to do it. For instance, it probably doesn't make too much sense to give a caster athletics, but Intimidate could make sense if they're happy to flex their magic. Other than that, quite often you'll run to a minion or a creature that won't have athletics or Intimidate, even if it would make sense. You're fine to give them a modifier that's in line with their other skills, but if you want to make it weaker or stronger, adding a -2 or a +2 will keep it in balance just fine. The second thing I want to suggest is compression actions. Not for the actions themselves, but for map. What I mean by that is using things like the grab ability, which allows a creature that just hits on to then attempt to grapple at the same map as the attack. Knockdown does a similar thing, but for trip. So we have our basis and precedents, but what about other actions? Imagine an axe-wielding bad guy who swings their axe with such force it can drag people around. So in a successful attack with their axe, they can follow it up with a reposition without an increased map. The general rule of thumb here is that the following action can't be a damaging effect under normal circumstances, but still have the attack trait. Having the underlings do combat maneuvers is great as it means you as the GM have the opportunity to rearrange the battlefield. A reposition can put someone into flanking or remove cover for ranged attacks. This helps with their support role while not making them take the spotlight from the big bad. Now, let's extend this a bit further. So imagine an action called Gut Punch. It's 2 actions and is simply that the creature makes a strike, and if they hit, it also makes the target sickened 1, sickened 2 on a critical. I've seen this kind of thing in stat blocks, and it's kind of great for the underlings. They weren't going to be hitting with that second strike anyway, so why not make that first one a little bit more meaningful? Clumsy, enfeebled, dazzled, drained, if you want to get spicy. The list goes on. All of these can play into making the underlings feel dangerous without being overpowered, and by extension, the boss even deadlier because now their abilities are going to have an easier time. A word about synergy and combos before we close out though. This gets into a little more complicated terrain and is a big case-by-case basis to cover in a single video, but if you have a big bad you want to use, have their underlings have a passive or an ability that synergizes with them, like draconic cultists that aren't affected by a dragon's breath attack, but get a buff instead, like doing additional damage matching the breath weapon. Or a lich that when they cast a spell, the underlings can use a reaction to stride towards the target of the spell. The list goes on, but the sky's the limit for this kind of thing, and having abilities that mix together like this can go a long way towards making combats a lot more interesting for both sides of the screen. Anyway, that's enough from me, but I think underlings can really make combat interesting, but they have to be in a more supporting role. If the players can easily ignore them, then there's no point to them being there, and you might as well have spent the encounter budget on something else. But having more dangerous goons can really make for memorable boss fights, where parties have to dedicate effort to deal with the underlings. Either way, definitely something to think about. I know I will be. So this has been me, Obscura, and my Eldritch buddy Wheaton. Hoping this video helps make your minions magnificent, and if you liked it, feel free to like and comment, and hell, drop your own ideas for minion actions in the comments. Let's see what maniacal machinations we can all come up with. Also, if you want to support the channel, links to the Patreon are down below, as well as links to my first major release, Blackpowder Magic and Plot, a Blackpowder Revolution themed supplement book for Pathfinder 2nd edition. All that said, I hope you have a good day, a good night, a good week, no matter where you are in the world, and remember, as always, we are the storytellers. Goodbye, everyone.